Hello and welcome to this video podcast on human evolution. This is a pretty long chapter, but we're only going to cover bits and pieces of it. It's an important topic to cover because we just got done talking about population genetics and how certain factors could occur that change allele frequencies, and how changing allele frequencies over time can lead to macroevolution, that is, the formation of new species. And so as you look at this table here, and this is the same one from your textbook as well, I want to point a few things out. First thing I want to point out, because this is a big misconception in the general public. I often hear people say something on the lines of this, and you've seen pictures of this as well, where you have chimpanzees and they somehow or another evolve into humans. If you've been taught that in the past, I want you to know that this is not evolution. This is not how humans evolved. This is not how any of the evidence or data suggests that humans evolved. How humans evolved is more accurately shown in this figure here. So let's just get rid of this here so we don't accidentally get that stuck in our minds. What the evidence for human evolution shows is that humans, and this table, I don't know how well it's going to show up in your podcast here, but Homo sapiens, shown right here, have only been around for a very short period of time. In fact, let's just indicate that here. It's pretty important, I think. Homo sapiens have only been walking this earth for about 200,000 years. We're a fairly young species. So next, I want to show you this point here. This is the point where Neanderthals branched off. And we'll talk about those in a little bit. But Neanderthals and Homo sapiens had a common ancestor that broke away here about 300,000 years ago. They went their separate ways, and then Neanderthals were formed, and they died out. But the Homo sapiens went this way, and our species has survived, as you might have heard. Another species to think about, because it's a pretty direct ancestor of us, are Homo erectus. They were alive about 2 million years ago. And Homo erectus evolved into species that would ultimately become Homo sapiens. All along this path, even if it's not shown here, there are species that just didn't make it. Now I also want to point out this common ancestor here. And this is a common ancestor of Homo sapiens and chimpanzees and bonobos. So this is sometimes where the confusion comes into play. And this occurred about 4.4 million years ago, where the species diverged from each other. And this line ultimately went down the path that led to Homo sapiens, us. This path went along here and ultimately developed into chimpanzees and bonobos. This is a common ancestor between chimpanzees and bonobos. I don't have time in this class to talk about it, but you might not be as familiar with bonobos, but it's very interesting to compare chimpanzees with bonobos and how different they are in their social and population structures. Here is a common ancestor of gorillas, chimpanzees, bonobos, and humans. Here is a common ancestor of all of them, including the orangutans. Something else to notice in this figure is everything at the top here are animals that are alive today. Everything below are extinct animals. So today we have orangutans, gorillas, chimpanzees, bonobos, and Homo sapiens. They all live today. Their ancestors are no longer alive. They've been outcompeted with these species that ultimately became what's on this top row. I mentioned just a moment ago that humans have been around for, say, 200,000 years. Chimpanzees around for about 18 million years. So chimpanzees as a species is much older than humans. And because humans are a relatively young species, this is a statement that I think is pretty telling. Two humans on opposite sides of Earth, say somebody in Mount Pleasant, Michigan, and somebody in New Delhi, India, those two individuals on the opposite sides of Earth are more similar genetically than two chimps in the same forest. We've only been around 200,000 years. It seems maybe like that's a long time, but on evolutionary scales, It's a very, very short period of time, where chimpanzees have been around a lot longer, and they've been able to diverge genetically within their species to a greater extent than us pesky humans who've only inhabited this earth for a very short period of time. Another way to look at it is like this. If you consider a 24-hour clock with all of evolution, starting from bacteria all the way up to humans, humans represent about 1 second of that 24-hour clock. So we are clearly new players in this game of organisms on Earth. I should also mention, while we're on this diagram here, all of these organisms, all of these species I should say, all of this occurred in Africa. Everything up here on top originated in Africa. When our ancestors left Africa, we certainly picked up new mutations that allowed us to thrive in certain environments. However, it should be noted there were two competing hypotheses upon where Homo sapiens evolved, and let's just spend a little bit of time talking about that. All right, so the two hypotheses were the out of Africa and the multi-regional hypothesis. So I'm going to attempt, and don't laugh, a very rough map here. So this is Africa. And then I'm going to draw, this is where it's going to get bad real quick, Europe. And then I'm going to draw Asia. And yes, these are horrible, but you get the idea. Now we know that all early ancestors were in Africa. That was pretty well established. All the way, say, through Homo erectus, who we know was one of our more recent ancestors, as well as Neanderthals. Now, the multi-regional hypothesis said that Homo erectus migrated out of Africa and settled in many different regions. And then in these regions, or along the way, other species evolved that ultimately led to Homo sapiens. So here I'm just going to put HS for Homo sapiens. So the multi-regional hypothesis says that, again, Homo erectus migrated out of Africa. Some stayed in here, of course, but some migrated out. And in these independent areas, multi-regional, Homo sapiens evolved. It's harder to imagine that happening, that it would occur in so many different spots. Not saying it couldn't happen, but what I'm going to tell you is that the evidence does not support that. Now, the out of Africa hypothesis would have claimed that many different ancestors migrated out of Africa, including Homo erectus, including Neanderthals, and others. And more importantly, one of those others is Homo sapiens. The out of Africa hypothesis states that Homo sapiens evolved in Africa. They were first living in Africa, and then from Africa, they migrated to Europe and Asia and spread across the world. Out of Africa says they all started here. Now, I said that the evidence supports this. What is that evidence? Well, we don't have time to go into great detail of this, but I do want you to know that this evidence includes fossils, geological evidence, DNA evidence, massive amounts of DNA evidence supporting the out of Africa hypothesis, and other anthropology sources of data support the out of Africa hypothesis and refutes this multi-regional hypothesis. So I said earlier that Homo sapiens have been around for about 200,000 years, and it seems like we might be done. So the question is, are humans still evolving? Or are we just done? And the reason this question sometimes comes up is people will say because of modern medicine we're eliminating certain diseases, people are living longer. Is there a point where modern medicine will stop evolution because we'll have achieved perfection? Well, two things with that I want to tell you. First, evolution, another misnomer about evolution. Evolution does not select perfection. Rather, evolution is based upon natural selection. Those individuals within a population that can produce more progeny, those individuals are going to pass on the most alleles to the next generation, And that is what evolves. It doesn't mean they're perfect. It means that there is a reproductive advantage for those individuals. So it does not select perfection. And the other thing I want to point out is that, yes, yes, we are evolving. But we don't feel it, right? Evolution takes thousands of years. And so we may not see what traits are being selected for today that maybe in 10,000 years will be a defining phenotype in humans. We just won't see that. But what we do know is there is evidence of human evolution more recently in evolutionary time standards. We know that, so let's put this down here, evidence for this continuation of human evolution. We know that there are about 1,800 genes, close, a little less than 10% of our genes, have been changed by natural selection. And this has all occurred within the past 50,000 years. The other piece of evidence, I'm going to need a little bit more room to work with. And this other piece of evidence is lactose tolerance. We're used to hearing about lactose intolerance, but I'm going to talk to you about lactose tolerance. Most mammals make this enzyme called lactase. It helps metabolize lactose, milk sugar, the sugar that's found in milk. Now, in most mammals, this is inactivated, this enzyme, in adults. It's an evolutionary advantage to allow mammals to produce lactase so when they're nursing, they can survive off of the breast milk. However, early in human evolution, there was no need to continue to metabolize lactose because as adults, they weren't consuming milk. So what happened about 8,000 years ago, humans started to domesticate cows, goats, sheep, and such. They might have domesticated them earlier than that. That I don't recall. But about this time, they started to milk them, we have evidence of. However, most humans at this time, if they tried to consume milk, they would have got sick. Because most humans at this time were lactose intolerant. That was the plan. That's what they were supposed to be because they weren't drinking milk. However, let's say you had a whole bunch of individuals here, and I'll just represent those by dots. And these individuals are lactose intolerant. As adults. As infants, they could metabolize lactose. But as adults, they can't. However, there may be one individual, maybe two, that are lactose tolerant as adults. So at this time when they started producing milk for these populations, again, most people got sick from it, but some people could drink it. And if they could drink it, they became stronger. They had a source of nutrition that others didn't have. And because they had a source of nutrition that others didn't have, they became more competitively fit, like most humans are today. Not everybody, of course. So these individuals were competitively more fit because they could produce more progeny. And because they could produce more progeny over the next several generations, you would look at this population and you would see more of the individuals that could metabolize lactose. You still had a lot of lactose intolerant individuals, as we still do today, but at some point what happened was it sort of flipped, and you had more people that were lactose tolerant because those people had that extra source of nutrients. And if you're lactose intolerant, you know that people who are lactose intolerant still exist. And that's really what you want. You want every population to have a mixture of alleles because that allows this population to evolve. If this was all a population of only lactose intolerant individuals, this evolution could not have happened, or not as easily have happened. So this is some clear evidence of evolution that has happened within the past 6,000 or 8,000 years. So yes, humans are still evolving. We just don't know to what extent. Now, I'd like to end this podcast with a discussion here on genes that make us human. And so I'm just going to make a list of them here. The first one is this gene called FOXP2. In humans, FOXP2 is important in speech. In fact, we know that individuals with a mutation in FOXP2 have severe speech problems. Now, FOXP2 is found in all kinds of mammals, and even in non-mammals. And they differ in between 2 and, say, 8 amino acids, depending on the species. But we know FOXP2 is important in those other species, like it's important in mice for their ability to communicate with other mice. It's important in bats for echolocation. It's important in birds to help produce their songs. But we know that humans and chimpanzees, the proteins differ by 2 amino acids. And again, this is between chimps and humans. Now, it's not just this different that has enabled chimpanzees and humans to have a different way of communicating by speech, but it's certainly a major factor. Interestingly, Neanderthals, when we look at their DNA, and humans, FOXP2 is the same. There's no difference. Now, I want to say something real quick now about Neanderthals and humans that I forgot to mention earlier, so it may not be the best fit for it, but this is where we're going to put it. I want to remind us that Neanderthals, in addition to having the same FOXP2, our genomes are 99.7% identical. That's pretty amazing. It's interesting to think, like, how did Homo sapiens, what were the circumstances that allowed Homo sapiens to survive, but not Neanderthals, when our genomes were quite similar? Another thing I want to point out is that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens coexisted. We outlasted them, but we shared the same geography at the same time. And we used to debate whether or not Neanderthals and Homo sapiens did more than just meet. That is, did they ever mate? And there is strong evidence now that indeed Neanderthals and Homo sapiens did mate with each other. And that evidence is in our genome. Homo sapien genome contains about, depending on the person, between 1 and 4% Neanderthal. I don't have much room here, so I'm just going to abbreviate this here, DNA. And when I had my genome sequenced a few years ago, they'll tell you how much of your DNA is Neanderthal. I probably shouldn't admit this to you all, but my DNA is about 3% Neanderthal. So I have more Neanderthal DNA in me than the average human. I'm not sure if I should be proud of that or not. I always thought that was a little high. My wife thinks it's a little low, but that's a debate for another day. So let's move on to this second gene. Keratin is responsible for making hair. And there are a few genes of keratin, but one of these genes in humans has a nonsense mutation. And in other mammals, and particularly if you think about chimpanzees, they don't have a nonsense mutation. So in chimpanzees, that keratin gene is active, and in humans, it's not active, which has led to humans being, for lack of a better way of saying it, less hairy. It's hypothesized being less hairy allowed us to develop more sweat glands. That allowed us to travel further in search of food or shelter or other necessities. There is also some evidence that says that having naked skin, that is less hair, more sweat glands, allowed us to get rid of certain hair or skin parasites more efficiently than other species that had hair, or had lots of hair, shall we say. The next one we've already talked about, quite a bit in fact, but I'm going to put it on this list because it does make us uniquely human, and that is hemoglobin. Compared to other mammals like chimpanzees or direct ancestors of humans, having these extra hemoglobins, particularly having fetal, which is fairly unique to humans and other advanced hominids, this allowed for, as we've said before, better brain development. The next gene I want to tell you about is AHI1. This gene is important in controlling posture, balance, and coordination. Our AHI1 is significantly different than the AHI1 gene found in chimpanzees and gorillas. There are some who hypothesize that having a different allele of AHI1 in humans allowed us to have the ability to walk, because this allele is believed to control posture, balance, and coordination. So with this allele, we could put one foot in front of the other, and lo and behold, we were walking. Some of the evidence that supports this is that in humans, when this gene is mutated, individuals have actually quite severe phenotypes, but one of those is a lack of coordination and often the inability to walk properly. And the last gene I want to talk about is MYH16. Briefly, this is a gene that forms muscles in the head, particularly in the jaw area. Humans, MYH16 is mutated. It's non-functional. It has a nonsense mutation in it. Being mutated and not forming these large muscles in our jaws that we see in some primates allowed our skull to take up that space and become bigger. And that and some other evidence suggests that not having this gene allows for a larger brain to develop. There are many genes that we could have talked about that make us unique from some of our direct ancestors and then from other primates like chimpanzees. And that brings us to the close of our discussion on human evolution. If you have any questions at all, please make sure you talk to me. If not, I'll see you in the next podcast. Bye for now.